I've titled this An Old History Lesson, and that just flows from my mouth. I got thinking, why is that such an easy title? I think when I was 12 years old, I used to say that a lot. That old teacher's giving me an old history lesson today. Three things I want to mention before I really get started. First of all, I didn't know I was going to deliver this on this day. It just so happens it does fit in with the memorial of the blowing of trumpets. But if you're ordinarily a note taker, this might not lend itself to notes, I don't know, which is probably good news. Another thing I need to tell you, since I'm going to relate things to you that I learned in this room 42 years ago, I hope you'll be lenient with me if I don't remember all the little facts and dates. 42 years ago. Also, I better mention this, since I'm going to try to make a connection between old history and future history or prophecy. Remember that there are many different interpretations of prophecy, and I've tried to rely on the one I think our church believes in. But again, I may make mistakes, and if I do, I know He will tell me that I've got the wrong interpretation. From 1968 to 1971, this building here was, this Renaissance Center was then the Kingsport University Center. And it offered courses from ETSU. I completed several classes here, right here in this very room. And so I'm going to take you on a trip back to those classes, at least two of them today. Two history classes, not American history, but European history. And roughly, I think one of them was the history of Europe, Middle Ages. That would be about 500, 1500 AD. The other course, I believe, was the history of Europe, 1500, 1850, or something like that. But it really doesn't matter, because anything I say about European history today, I'm even going back before the Middle Ages and into the future. It's history that hasn't happened yet. Prophecy. Now, as you know, in any study of literature and history, the topics of God and religion and the church appear often. And embedded in any study of European history is also the story of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, they're the ones that call it holy, and I don't, that's not my way. Now, but in those old history books, they may not call it the Roman Empire. But our church historians have kind of deciphered all of that. But anyway, the church is mentioned frequently as part of the Holy Roman Empire. So now I'm going to ask you an easy question. When I was in this class 42 years ago, the front of the room was there. And the professor was standing there, and he talked a lot about the church. What church was he referring to? Of course, the Catholic Church. Okay, you're one for one. Now, did you ever wonder, was the Church of God mentioned in those old history textbooks and in European history? The way I'm going to answer that is, well, sort of. The Church of God might have been referenced in a paragraph something like this: those heretics hiding out in the Alps, or something like that. And back then, I didn't know that. I'm sure I read that then, but I didn't know they were talking about us. And they were probably talking about other people too. Those people were in flight because they were often pursued, persecuted, maybe even tortured and killed. Now, these are some names that they may have been called. I don't know for sure. Sabbath keepers, that's okay. The Judaizers, the 14thers, or the Waldenses, or the Waldensians. Apparently, our church believes that in southern France in the 12th century, there was a group of people who probably were representative of the current church today. They were led by a man named Peter Waldo. If you're interested in such history as that, you can look up Peter Waldo in an encyclopedia on the internet, a lot of stuff in there. And I just put this in here as an extra. I wrote this down once upon a time. The first representative of the Church of God in colonial America might have been a man by the name of Stephen Mumford, who came to America in the 1600s. I don't know if that's absolutely correct or not, but you could look his name up too, if you're interested. Now, to the Catholic Church, our predecessors were heretics, but that was nothing new. You don't even have to turn to this, but in Acts 24:14, New Testament Christians were considered to be heretics. And today, even you and I are considered to be heretics, probably if for no other reason. One, that we don't believe in the Trinity doctrine. And there are other reasons they think we're heretics too. But they don't call us that now. Now we're considered to be members of a cult. Okay, that's the word now. And I think Arnold J. Armstrong once preached a sermon, I think I've got that taped at home, where he said, if you go with the strict definition of cult, we are a cult. I think he said that about 25 years ago on an old tape. But like I said in my last sermon there, it's okay to be considered oddballs, marching out of step with the world and its religions, just so long as we're marching in step with God. That's what really matters. Now, in revisiting my old history classes, and you're going to go with me here, I can recall references to coronation ceremonies of European kings, emperors, potentates, whatever they were called, queens, of that Holy Roman Empire. Those coronation ceremonies were highlighted, of course, by that new ruler being crowned king. And here's the second question. Who would actually place that crown on the king's head? Okay, the Pope. At least in most cases, that was the way it was. So, now I'm not picking on the Pope. I dated a Pope once. Now, I'm telling you the truth. Now, she looked good in a dress. I'm not making that up. Okay. That act of the Pope crowning an emperor, is it safe for this to go out on the internet? No. It's too late now, isn't it? Okay. That act of the Pope crowning an emperor signified something very important. I mean, it's important. What that showed was that the church was more powerful than the state, and that the Pope was more powerful than the king. At least during much of that time. I don't think it wasn't always that way. I'll show you that later. True, one did not want to cross the Pope in his church. Get that pun there? Okay. Not only was that church pursuing our predecessors, they were also determined to squash any rebellion within their own ranks. They were kind of paranoid about that, apparently. They might also even put to death anybody trying to translate the Bible into some readable form. They didn't want anybody to read it, to be able to read it. So they were translating it into languages that the masses could read. Another pun there. And the Pope could also make pronouncements against the king and even excommunicate. I had another pun here. I'll try. And that's no bull. Now, you know what I'm talking about. Is there some edict or decree that a Pope issues and they call it a bull? Maybe this was a bull. I mean, he may have issued a bull and got rid of some of these people. I had an insurance man once, and his name was Mr. Bull. And the best insurance guy I ever knew. But it was the hardest thing on earth for me to call him up and say, Mr. Bull, what about this policy? And if I'd gotten the wrong number, they'd think I was pulling their leg or something. But anyway. Okay. Somebody told me 2 months ago, I was in Charlotte, North Carolina that day, but you did a sermon in here. I'm talking to Wayne Graves here. People out there in television. On the Muslims and the history and all that. Okay. Now, I'm not an expert on this, but I'll just generalize it here. The 11th, 12th, and 13th century saw that same church that I've been talking about crusading throughout the Middle East, fighting to win the Holy Land from the Muslims. And that bloody fighting created animosity and distrust between those two groups, which remain to this day, and it's simmering over there in Europe now again. Don't know if you remember it or not, but President Bush, right after 9/11, he made a speech which he said something like, we're going on a crusade to stamp out terrorism. Well, immediately there was reaction to that, the word crusade. Now, he didn't mean anything by that. I think they kind of corrected it as well as they could. But you just don't want to say crusade around those people. I've already said it, maybe, I don't know. But I've got written here, Muslims versus Christians. At least that's whom the Muslims think they're angry with. But among other people, they're angry with the Jews. But actually, most Muslims have probably never met a true Christian. Now, I'm going to come back to this old history lesson later. Now we're going to jump ahead into History written in advance, prophetic events. And I've got a few of these, do we not believe? Okay. Do we not believe, this is a church, our church, that out of Europe will arise a union of 10 nations headed by what the Bible calls the beast? Okay, we all agree on that. A political military dictator. Now, because we've been forewarned, we will recognize him as the beast. But he will not be generally known as that. There won't be any headline which says the beast of Revelation finally arrives on the scene in Europe. That's not going to be there. There's not going to be a headline to that effect, but we will know that. Now, here's another, do we not believe? Do we not believe that at about that same time, or at the same time, that a great false prophet will arise, the likes of whom the world has never seen before? He will even perform what appears to be miracles, but which in truth will be lying wonders performed by a demonic force. He will appear to be a bringer of peace. He will have an air of divinity about him, claiming to be God. Yet again, because we've been forewarned, we'll recognize him as a false prophet. And we can be thankful that we have been warned about that ahead of time, because that's going to be pretty persuasive deception there. But again, there won't be any headline reading, the false prophet establishes headquarters in Jerusalem. The world will not recognize him that way, but we will. Now, firstly, the whole world will be effectively deceived. But what else is it? That's always been that way. And I'm going to stop here and review, because I don't want you to miss out on anything. Here's what I've gone over so far. We've got the 10-nation union over in Europe, headed by the beast, or the military dictator. And then we've got the false church, headed by the false prophet. Now, to borrow an analogy from regarding Ted Armstrong, we've got to get that lady on the back of that tiger. You remember him? He used to say that? Because they're about to go for a ride. And they're going to ride roughshod. I didn't know all this misery was such a happy thing for you. All this rough stuff coming up here. They're going to ride roughshod over old enemies, new enemies, or anybody else gets in their way. At least for a while they're going to do that. Now, for that to happen, this military beast and his empire and this false prophet and his church, they're going to have to unite in some kind of an alliance. They probably will despise each other, really. But they will need each other, and therefore they're going to use each other. Have what? Why will this beast need this false prophet? Now, here's the way I see it. I don't know. Maybe you agree. Human beings usually don't want to be ruled by a dictator, unless that dictator appears to have solutions to the problems, can deliver them from various crises, and can restore national pride and power, kind of like Hitler did. I guess that's why they followed him. If somebody appears like a savior that can change all this inflation and unemployment and all these other bad things. Now, Europeans, minus the European Muslims, and I hear they're gaining in population over there. The Europeans overall, though, will follow this dictator, I believe, pretty easily. But what about other nations, such as Australia, Canada, the United States, South Africa, Latin American countries? We don't know. I don't know what pathetic condition they'll be in, and they'll probably be beat down pretty badly. But at that time, fear and despair may convince them to pay allegiance to this beast in Europe. But he'll probably need something more to make people agreeable to receiving his mark. That mark of the beast, whatever that is, that's not my topic today. Now, what about a big endorsement? That's what he needs. I mean, a really big endorsement. What about receiving the approval and endorsement of that almost godlike false prophet? Would that not make the beast more appealing to the masses and make them more willing subjects for him? Remember, this is a revival of the Holy Roman Empire. When this happens, that's what it is. It's temporal. Did I have those numbers right? Okay. So how appropriate it would be to bring back from the past that old coronation ceremony. Maybe a few years before this, everybody around the world watched Prince Charles crowned king of England. Maybe that inspired them. Maybe they thought, wait, we can do better than that. We can have a bigger affair over here than you can. But for whatever reason, if they do decide to do this coronation thing, now they can let the whole world see it by TV, internet. This crowning of the beast by the false prophet. It'd be the greatest coronation the world has ever seen. Now, I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm just saying it's possible. Many people would then think, if this great religious man, this God-like figure, endorses that dictator, then he can't be all that. Is such a scenario possible? These are thoughts which come to me when I'm walking 2 and 3 in the morning, right before the policeman shines the spotlight on me. I kind of lose my train of thought after that. But now we don't have that lady on the back of that beast yet. Because that false prophet's got to get something out of this. Well, in return, this is the way it would appear to me, he would receive the military backing of that empire. Since the Muslims will probably already be furious over what's taking place. Just watching it on TV will get them all stirred up. The stage would then be set for a renewal of that old conflict between Christendom and Islam. Maybe the new battle cry might be, we brought back the coronation, let's bring back the Crusades. So now, that lady in the tiger, or that church on the back of that beast, is ready to ride. But the Middle Eastern nations see what is about to happen. They're not stupid. And apparently, they strike first. But they're no match for that European power. And the beast and the false prophet prevail. Daniel 11:40 might be describing that battle. I don't know for sure, but it appears that way to me. Where it says that the king of the south will push against the king of the north, and the king of the north prevails. Well, now that the beast has gotten what he wanted from this relationship, with this false prophet in the church, he turns against them. He orders them to dismount. Get off my back. That's what I want to say. Sounds like I've said that to a lot of people before. He orders this lady to get off his back. Okay. I'm reminded of John Kennedy's inaugural address where he said that those who foolishly seek power by riding in the back of the tiger often end up inside. Or if you prefer a less bloody analogy, I used to tell this story when I was librarian. The little gingerbread man riding the back of the fox. Now see, that's not as violent. Since we're in such a good humor today, let's go with the gingerbread man. Okay. Actually, it appears that the beast doesn't gobble up this church and the prophet, but he does take a big bite out of it. It diminishes their power and influence. And I know that he doesn't completely destroy the false prophet because Revelation 19:20 states that both of these characters, the beast and the false prophet, will still be alive when Christ returns. And at that time, both will be cast alive in a lake of fire. I can't stop now. Let's revisit my old history class one last time. Were there any instances in European history in which the state turned on the church and the ministry? Yes. That happened several times, actually. The most notable one has to do with Napoleon Bonaparte. By the way, don't we consider that one of the revivals of the Holy Roman Empire? I think we do. So, he established himself as a great conqueror and leader, and it was time for him to be coronated, crowned, and I reckon they were going through the ceremony like usual. The Pope standing there with the crown in his head, ready to put it on Napoleon's head. What does Napoleon do? He takes that crown out of the Pope's hand and places it on his own head, as if to say, "You're not my papa. I'm sovereign over you. The state is more powerful than the church as long as I'm in." That's the end of the history lesson. So now we tie all this together. I've spoken about the past and the future. Now let me talk about the present. Prophecy, this is to me, can be kind of like a jigsaw puzzle with many pieces, both large and small. Today I've worked with only a few pieces of that puzzle. I've not even mentioned Russia, China, India, Indonesia, or Japan, and neither have I mentioned famines, pestilences, and the earthquakes and heavenly signs. In the Bible, though, we're given the pieces of that prophetic puzzle. Here a little and there a little. But I doubt that anybody has all the pieces correctly arranged. Yet, as God's church, shouldn't we have more pieces correctly arranged than anybody else? Seems that way to me. Today, I've told you about things I learned in this room 42 years ago. But in the last few years, I've learned some other things in this room. Also, and they have more lasting significance and importance. So in conclusion, let me contrast my two learning experiences from right here in this room over the last 42 years. 42 years ago in this room, I learned about a corrupt political system and a corrupt religious system, the remains of which may even now be preparing the way for two instruments of Satan to appear on the scene. And they may be the two most wicked men in ever lived, possible. On the other hand, during the last few years, again, right here in this room, I've learned about a church in which God may even now be preparing two of his instruments, two of our brothers, whom he will choose to become his two witnesses. These will be godly men, performing godly miracles, empowered to perform God's final work of witness and warning. The world will have its two heroes, but these two men will be our heroes, and they will be the genuine dynamic duo. 42 years ago in this very room, I learned about the coronation of kings, but they were earthly kings with temporary reigns, and their reigns were highlighted by wars, corruption, oppression, and injustice. But during the last few years, again, right here in this very room, I've learned about another coronation of not just any king, but the King of Kings, whose reign will be eternal, whose reign will be highlighted by peace and freedom and justice, mercy, love, and joy, and all those things which humanity, even the Muslims, Jews, and Christians, Catholics, everybody wants those things. But like John said a while ago, the world has not generally had the knowledge of how to receive those blessings. They're the right kind of knowledge. But today, this memorial of the blowing of trumpets points to that day of Christ's return, when that knowledge of the Lord will at last begin filling the whole earth, like the waters covering the sea. So, as we anticipate all of these end-time events, let's take comfort in the inspiring, encouraging, and hopeful words of Christ in Luke 21:28. When these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh.